And there are benefits as well to it, that potentially is not there or has not been there in the past with the more traditional forms of financing.
And you have, of course, an increased role in technology and data, and of course now AI. What's happening is you have that also, disrupting with the traditional investment process, like we said, in mainstream investments.
If we just focus on Europe, it's not something that's been around for forever.
And, there's a large number of unregulated vehicles which, of course, give a lot of much more flexibility and tend to run at a lower cost.
Is to approach the topic with an open mind because there are benefits.
Welcome to PwC Trend Talks. In today's episode, we're discussing private equity. And to discuss this interesting topic, I have with me Mifsud Bonnici, who drives the regulatory aspect, particularly in the asset management space, and Mark Tabone, who's driving the mergers and acquisitions segment in our advisory division. I hope you stay with us until the end of this episode. We'll start off with Mark, actually. Could you at least give us a bit of a brief understanding of what private equity is, particularly in today's world? We hear a lot about private equity, but if you could boil it down to what it actually entails, we'll start off with that.
No, in fact, private equity basically is funds that acquire private companies to kind of take them to another level in different ways. Basically, at the more basic level, the main scope of private equity is to kind of increase the value of an asset, and then eventually at some point in time sell it off to make a gain. I mean, basically what private equity does is it kind of provides a form of fresh capital to any business in that sense, in order for that business to kind of continue to generate the returns that it can, and basically grow the business accordingly. Obviously, one of the main aspects of private equity is in relation to what it can do for the business. So perhaps a bit of an alternative kind of financing for that business compared to potentially the more traditional forms of financing.
And that's the reason why it's such a hot topic at the moment?
It's a hot topic because, yes, I mean, there's a bit of a move, and we'll probably look at that as well a bit later on, but it's a bit of a move away from the traditional, right? Because with increased regulation and all this kind of thing, it's on banks and the more traditional forms, private equity provides that alternative. And there are benefits as well to it, that potentially is not there or has not been there in the past with the more traditional forms of financing. One of the main aspects is that for sure is different, is that the people running the private equity and the particular investment, are there for the company, in terms of advice, management, strategic, and it gives them a bit of a form of more of a hands-on. So it's not, kind of just providing the money. Mm-hmm. There are different things, but this is at a broad level, the way it looks. One of the main things as well is that there's more of a gear, or they're more geared towards more, entities with more growth potential, in the tech space and the like, and innovation. So there's a bit of a link between private equity, sometimes a bit of an overlay between private equity and venture capital to an extent, because of this aspect of, the innovation and kind of the startup and giving capital for an idea to potentially grow, So, but in different ways. So private equity would come in at different levels, different parts of the life cycle of a business. So they do come in to an extent earlier on, but that's more venture capital in nature. But then they could come at any point in time, even for more mature companies that are seeking further investment, further capital to kind of grow and continue to survive and actually grow. So that's at a broad level.
Agreed. if we had to move on to Chris, Chris is also in the asset management space, and we hear a lot about alternatives and how even asset management entities are all moving into alternatives. And when we see even projections of what's coming, it's alternatives, the space where one can grow. What do you think of this?
Yes, no, agreed. So of course, private equity is, if you like, one of the components, one of the main areas which we, in terms of sort of alternative fund management. Okay, so as the name implies, there's been a development, right, for investors looking at strategies which are as an alternative and the diversification from the more traditional sort of listed investments and so on. And I think this in fact trend or this focus on private equity is part of an international trend, let's say, like Nadia's been saying, around sort of more assets under management moving into the alternative space, or at least growing at a much faster rate than general assets under management. And this is because areas like private equity, like real estate funds, like commodities, even hedge funds, okay, which look at obviously some more complex investments, are being looked at more closely and are attracting more capital. And it's for different reasons. I mean, obviously, I'm no economist, but obviously, if you're interested in funds, you're always going to think a bit about macroeconomic factors. I mean, over the recent past, we've had the low interest rate environment, right? So people are looking at opportunity for higher returns, basically. So considering these alternative spaces. And a bit like Mark is saying as well, as things become more sophisticated, the business landscape becomes more sophisticated, and you have, of course, an increased role in technology and data, and of course now AI. What's happening is you have that also, disrupting a bit the traditional investment process, like we said, in mainstream investments. So, for example, tokenization and the idea that assets in the alternative space, which are typically liquid and a bit harder to go and dip in and out of course, thanks to digitization and tokenization, can be opened up. And there's also, of course, as you have younger investors and more tech-savvy investors, obviously interest in digital assets and strategies which are investing in sort of technology and underlying assets are increasing in popularity. And again, also that's part of sort of this push towards alternatives. And of course, even more recently, this volatility we have, on sort of on a geopolitical level and markets in general, again, pushes people to look at new opportunities, diversify, and so on. And of course, private equity is certainly a big part of that.
And in fact, you mentioned quite a number of things which we read about, etc. But how does Malta then position itself in attracting this kind of capital?
Yeah, I mean, clearly there's been a bit of a conscious effort more recently for Malta to find its space, okay, tell its story on asset management. I think we've had a budding industry for a while, and a lot of it was around startup funds and finding a place where people could, within a robust jurisdiction within the EU, start off their fund and gain a bit of track record, especially in the initial years. Okay, Malta did claim a little bit of space there. Then for a while there was a little bit, let's say, of plateauing, of a bit of we got stuck a little bit in that area. But more recently, I think, when looking for the relevance of Malta nowadays, again, we keep our traditional strong points, okay? So being in the EU and being cost effective. And there's, of course, the tax conversation as part of that, but there's a much wider conversation nowadays. And as well, the focus, because we are a smaller jurisdiction, we still have a regulator who's approachable, who's looking at innovating, as we've seen even in practice with Malta spaces in the digital asset space, okay? So if we look at MiCA, okay, so another regulation around crypto assets, which has a lot of overlap, of course, with the asset management side, we have a jurisdiction which is at the forefront of adoption and of conversation, of building an infrastructure and ecosystem even around investing in crypto assets and digital assets in general. And therefore, sort of there we are very much in the alternative space, and private equity is again an important part of that. So I think Malta is trying to claim a space there, and even more recently we've had, even from a sort of fund structuring perspective, okay, so what vehicles you're going to use, to implement your investment strategy. Then Malta is increasing, giving more flexible solutions to find that right balance between sort of regulated and flexible, basically.
Thank you, Chris. Mark, I'd like to pick on a point you mentioned before on the bank financing, because I'm sure that from your work, even advising your clients, you're seeing maybe a bit of a shift in the way entities are looking at raising capital. Do you see it locally, or it's more of an international stance that possibly raising capital is people are looking at different alternatives now, possibly in private equity as well, or it's
No, I mean, as in private equity is even if we just focus on Europe, it's not something that's been around for forever. So we're talking about the trajectory has been pretty much in the last 15, 20 years or so, I would say. So obviously businesses on the continent and people who've collaborated with have increasingly been, kind of had available the private equity side when it comes to an investment option. Like I mentioned earlier as well, even the fact that is becoming more restrictive in terms of acquiring the more traditional forms, it does provide, and it has provided, that alternative financing, which kind of there are benefits for, and entities and businesses have found the benefit of, being financed and getting fresh equity or some kind of instrument through a private equity instrument. In Malta, it's still early days to an extent, like Chris was saying, in the sense that there is a sense of an opportunity, and that is something that we've actually questioned and discussed as well. How things could potentially pan out in Malta. I mean, we do have certain benefits that I believe are there as a jurisdiction, the link to the EU, obviously, probably even strategically, our position and whatnot. So the potential would be there, and there are certain elements of our economy as well that could potentially attract more private equity to Malta, which eventually could potentially grow to a scale where local businesses could benefit as well. I mean, we're set up as a financial services jurisdiction. I believe we have the things in place in Malta that could satisfy and attract this PE investment. And our resilience as well. I think there's this opportunity and there's this kind of sense on the market in general. I mean, we've gone through quite a lot of different economic downturns and potentially linked to financial services and other sectors like iGaming and the underlying real estate. That has kind of seen us through until today. I believe there is even from the government side potentially an idea that we need another sector to continue to generate our economy. Private equity could potentially be one of them, and obviously much depends on there is the link to innovation.
This is an important point because obviously it's a bit of a transitional time in a way.
Exactly.
So we've had a history of being quite an important center for financial service and for people to use Malta as an investment vehicle, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that can link in well in a time nowadays where things are a bit more sophisticated. There's we look for more substance. Then Malta can hopefully step into that space where a bit the evolution into private equity, into doing things in a bit more of a regulated way, in the sense of more sophistication and within the regulated context. Because nowadays there's huge compliance and regulatory risks all over, and the speed at which regulation keeps coming up, especially from the EU, but even internationally. Sort of that that this is the narrative, okay, and having a regulated and doing it in a more regulated way, let's say, helps. And especially Malta, like Mark said, in terms of strategic position and geographical location, there's also an opportunity that way. Even looking towards Africa. So that again, you have both from a local perspective and internationally, that you can create a center of sort of a gateway.
So Chris, when you think of private equity in your mind, it's in the regulated space, right? So it's, for example, in the form of a private equity fund rather than the unregulated companies. So people can understand a bit better. Obviously, we have different forms of funds that one can set up with, but you did mention the cost of regulation, etc. So in your mind, it gives investor confidence, etc. If you're setting up in the regulated space, right?
Yes, I think this discussion around regulated versus unregulated is always a very relevant one. Okay, in every particular set of circumstances, where someone is looking to pursue an investment strategy and start, attracting both institutional or any type of investor really, the decision as to when to go regulated, let's say. Okay, so of course nowadays in a number of jurisdictions you have different tools, different options on how you can structure your investment vehicle basically. And there's a large number of unregulated vehicles which of course give a lot of much more flexibility and tend to run at a lower cost. So I think there is many times a matter of getting to the critical mass, getting to that cost benefit balance where then at a point you can justify a little bit the costs fine of having a regulated vehicle, but then tap into the benefits of scalability, so the ease with which then you can attract more investors and segregate different strategies within your regulated vehicle and allow for quite an easy way of going in and out and liquidating your investment. And exactly, and being a bit more attractive from an investor perspective as well in today's world. Okay, like we said before, with the number of legal and regulatory risks around, a lot of big players and institutional investors will look for that peace of mind of having a regulated vehicle within an EU country. But of course, this is horses for courses type of thing in the sense, different circumstances will require their own analysis.
And we keep adding on new structures, right? So maybe in the private equity space, we see them more as alternative investment funds or professional investor funds. But there was the introduction as well of the limited partnerships, for example, which can match up well with possibly what other jurisdictions offer as well.
Yes, I think and we've seen at least more recently more activity in this sense locally. So not only on the sort of the brand or the license level, so the UCITS, AIF and Alternative Investment Fund and Professional Investor Fund level, and there we're seeing even a number of choices both from a self-managed perspective, which has been here for a while, but nowadays the notified regimes are being pushed as well. So the idea that at least the fund vehicle itself, especially if it's part of a wider infrastructure with a regulated manager, does not need too much regulation and should be launched quite quickly and very much a bit of a light touch regulated regime.
Yes, I mean the way it's promoted as well, it's a matter of days to get a notified structure approved.
Exactly. And even like you said before in terms of legal form, okay, so nowadays we recently had the launch of the special limited partnership funds, okay, again another vehicle which is meant to be as flexible as possible, very adept to be used in private equity, at least traditionally in bigger private equity jurisdictions, especially in the Anglo-Saxon world, you had limited partnerships being sort of the preferred sort of flexible instrument, and nowadays in Malta we should have very, very flexible and robust framework in that sense. So we're seeing a lot of these developments which remain in place together with what we're more used to more traditionally, so the CCAVs and the more sort of the continental way of doing things is also still present. So hopefully Malta can tap into both.
Do you think tax considerations are part of the decision on whether to set up in Malta, whether to set up as a fund, for instance? I believe funds are tax transparent.
So the fund that itself tends to be tax neutral wherever you do it, and as we're all aware, sort of, especially as time passes, tax maybe is becoming less of the focal point, but becoming just one of the various sort of things you need to consider to make sure you have an optimized sort of structure which makes sense from a cost benefit analysis. But still, of course, having said all that, you still it's still very important
to attract a foreign investor. It's one of the key. It's still one of the.
Yes, it is, and even whenever you're looking to do anything nowadays, if you're not understanding the tax consequences, that's still always going to remain relevant. So of course, in a fund structure, you need to see what's going on at investor level, any withholding taxes going up, where they're located, and so on, and of course even at underlying investment level, okay, which is where's the most sort of efficient way of structuring your investments, and Malta can help there as well usually. But again, it's a matter of paying attention to the detail as well on the tax side. But maybe, and even though maybe the tax might not be as much of a major driver as it used to be, it's also obviously part of the mix. And I think, and linking into that, obviously the discussion around having a regulated vehicle as opposed to not is also part of that, because of course regulated vehicles give help, create that substance, and really there's a decision to locate in Malta, which is a sort of a wide-ranging, holistic decision. Okay, and tax might be one of the considerations, but there are many others as well, including that Malta's the right place to create substance, especially if you're linking into certain strategies, like we're saying, whether it's on the digital assets side, whether you're investing in Africa and other things where Malta really makes sense.
No, fair enough. So we've touched a bit on the form, but what about the actual trends that we might be seeing? So going back to specifically to private equity, any specific trends that you're seeing at the moment, or
a bit linked to what we mentioned before, in the sense that the idea and a point that Chris touched on in terms of the investor. I mean, nowadays, even locally, the traditional investors are becoming a little bit more complex in the sense of what they're looking out for, and potentially, to an extent, a little bit more adventurous and ready to take slightly more risk, because as a consequence, the returns could be higher. So, like, this private equity topic could also be, at least locally, be driven a little bit by that. I mean, you have certain larger family businesses that have grown to a certain scale. As well. I mean, that's another point. So in terms of private equity, you need that scale, to be attractive for people to invest in your company. I mean, there's that element of, Malta's an island, and businesses here can have consolidated and are consolidating, and potentially there's still some more of that. But also looking overseas, and looking for potential investments overseas to, that could provide them that diversification and potentially that increased return so maybe at the moment they're seeing less of. So there is that sophistication, not only in terms of the assets that or the investments or the businesses that one, but the investor has become a little bit more sophisticated, and obviously there's different elements in the whole ecosystem that kind of one needs to look out for, and that is the form of financing, the type of asset you're looking at, and that kind of thing. I think, as in looking at it in that aspect, I mean, the private equity, as in kind of being domiciled and coming to domicile in Malta, I think there are some funds, and you guys can talk a little bit more about that. But the actual private equity coming here to invest in local entities, there's nothing of that. There could be some potential with some larger groups on the island. So, and I believe there has been some activity in the past with some, and maybe Chris can maybe speak a little bit about that as well, apart from everything else, right? That makes sense for them to hold their assets in a fund. At the moment, I mean, I think in the past year, there's been quite a lot of talk on the market. So there is an association that has actually been set up, PEFCA, which is focusing on private equity and venture capital, and it's kind of bringing together the stakeholders in the whole ecosystem, from financial advisors to investors and everyone else. And I think there is a little bit of, if I had to think about it, there is a bit more of knowledge out there in terms of where we're trying to go. I know that, like I said before, as a jurisdiction, as the next potential sector of growth, this could be it. I think it's interesting. One has to see how it pans out, in the coming years. But definitely an opportunity for Malta and for all stakeholders that could potentially be. It's a bit of, coming on from the financial services. It's very linked, even to an extent, the skill set and what the people that would need to to kind of participate in it. So let's see. As in, the trend is there, the talk is there. There's an association as well. Ourselves as a practice, we're attached, to it, and definitely are exploring all aspects of it. So it's interesting, definitely.
In fact, as Mark said, the majority of private equity structures, which we see in reality, relates to international investments. But as Mark is saying, there is a potential for local groups even to delve into that. And also, as we mentioned, when you're setting up a fund, there's the possibility of getting new investors. So the actual structure could give the new investors more confidence, given you're in the regulated space.
Yeah.
But I don't know what you think of it vis-a-vis the tangent which Mark was giving it for local groups, for example.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt that there's more attention being placed more recently in this space locally. I think if you have obviously the same trends we saw internationally to some extent are happening locally as well. So investors who are more demanding and more sophisticated. You have a degree of private wealth, which is building up both sort of at a family wealth sort of level, but also some of the larger businesses in Malta who are looking for investment opportunities and diversification, as Mark has been saying. So and that in a way is a context which is ripe for private equity and for the regulated private equity space, which maybe hasn't been popular locally, but now we have businesses of a certain size which would justify the cost benefit we talked about earlier, and also benefit from the pooling, of course, possibilities that funds give you. So having different families or different businesses, investing via the same private equity funds, both whether you're investing locally or investing in projects outside of Malta. And I think this way of thinking is increasing, and of course, because people are becoming even more demanding of having the right people to manage their investments, to be part of that whole sort of infrastructure, and always looking to diversify and to increase their returns, beyond the already sort of quite healthy activity around, investing in marketable securities, in listed equity or bonds internationally and so on, which has been going on for years. And maybe this is sort of natural evolution of that. I think, and one thing to comment about, even latching on a bit to the different developments happening locally, is the family office related development. So these could be relevant both locally and internationally. And of course, there are a number of different initiatives coming together to create the right, even regulatory environment for Malta to thrive in the family office space, which has been something that's been around for a while, and find that balance, where you can have the advantages of the regulated sort of structure in terms of sophistication, scalability, and the stuff we talked about before, but at the same time, very lightly, or if at all, regulated from a sort of compliance perspective. I think they're again another big opportunity
Linked
for
a
Malta.
lot, Chris, to succession and
Yeah,
succession
as well.
planning, right? Which is a whole
100%.
linked but different topic, and
Yes, we'll need another episode for that.
Yes, but a regulated fund, of course, does give you that liquidity, and especially
Agreed.
as a family or a business or a group of investors grows, it of course lends itself to in practice, manage things much more effectively from an investment perspective.
No, I think we all agree that this is an area where there is growth potential, both internationally and locally. I don't know if you have any concluding remarks in this respect, and
No, as
to
in
close this off.
on my end, as in we probably covered quite a lot of that, but I think it's like with everything else that is potentially locally still building up. I mean, it's important to approach it whatever part of the ecosystem, or whatever part of the, like, whichever stakeholder you are, as in with a bit of an open mind, in the sense sometimes we have this notion, as in kind of it's something that, we need to kind of replicate or do the same as. But I think one of the main things, and one of the things that also we're trying to do, internally, and even with some of the people that we collaborate with, is to approach the topic with an open mind, because there are benefits. So benefits both for if any of these businesses locally had to go down that route. there could be potentially benefits for them, being part of a private equity structure. But also the investor, so there are different aspects. I mean, I think one of the things that I like that's very attractive in terms of PE is the fact that you do have, it's not just the point I mentioned before, money coming in, full stop, and then you need to pay it back and interest on it and whatnot. But there's a bit of an attachment, so that the investor will come in and actually look at your business and try and achieve the business plan and achieve that growth, so that your value, and ultimately that's what the scope, coming back to where we started, right? The ultimate scope is that the value increases. So they're in it, and potentially not short term, medium to long term, as long as that growth is achieved,
And I would agree, okay? So certainly we mentioned a lot of opportunities in this space, okay? So definitely watch this space, I guess, is the message. But so watch the private equity space, let's say, but not only watching, because I think the ecosystem, exactly. I mean, finding our stories as a jurisdiction where Malta makes sense is crucial, okay? So I think, and we're seeing a lot of movement around there, and hopefully that momentum will keep going, and the space gets even more attention as it deserves.
Agreed.
That's good.
Definitely.
I think we've shown quite a lot of excitement about the topic. So at this stage, I thank Chris and Mark for their insights on the topic, and we hope that you found it as interesting as we did. Thank you.